Imagine taking away like the single loudest, most iconic part of your biggest holiday, and then having to invent a massive visual explosion just to replace the sonic one. You strip away all that noise, and to fill that gaping sensory void, you end up engineering an entirely new tradition.
It's a really fascinating problem to solve. How do you keep the celebratory spirit of a festival alive when the core mechanism of that celebration is suddenly prohibited?
Right, exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're wondering how a simple neighborhood workaround transformed over decades into a highly orchestrated geopolitical tool and, well, a candidate for UNESCO World Heritage, the answer lies in the architecture of a parade.
It really does.
Today, we're exploring the cultural evolution of Singapore's Chingay parade. To do this, we're pulling from an incredible column by Nanyang Technological University's Professor I Lo-fen, which was originally published in Liani Zaobao.
We've also got a stack of archival drops, regional news updates from Asia One and the Straits Times, and some official event briefs.
And our mission here is to uncover how a parade created to replace firecrackers became a massive national narrative. But to understand the sheer scale of what this event has become, we kind of have to look at its roots first.
Yeah, absolutely. So the word Chingay comes from the Hokkien term zhuangyi, which loosely translates to the art of costume and masquerade. Its DNA traces all the way back to the early 19th century in southern China.
Wow, okay.
Right. It originated as a traditional Taoist festival honoring the birthday of Tiangong, the god of heaven.
So it was deeply religious, incredibly grassroots, and highly participatory, like people dressing up, marching through the streets with drums and cymbals.
Exactly. But let's unpack this and bring it over to Singapore, because the trigger for the modern iteration is honestly brilliant.
Oh, it really is. So in 1973, the government had just banned the public from setting off firecrackers. Obviously, that stripped away that intense, chaotic Lunar New Year energy overnight.
You can't just take away firecrackers and not expect a reaction.
Right. The government recognized they had a massive cultural deficit on their hands. So Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew inaugurated the very first formal Chingay parade that year, effectively executing what we could call a sensory swap.
I love that phrase, sensory swap. They substituted the auditory chaos with this massive visual spectacle. Since they couldn't rely on the deafening roar of firecrackers anymore, they introduced sprawling dragon dances, martial arts displays, and street opera in local dialects.
And it was an immediate, overwhelming success.
It really was. It led the People's Association to establish it as an annual cornerstone of the cultural calendar.
Well, that visual explosion in 1973 was so successful that it clearly couldn't be contained to just a simple neighborhood scale. The government realized they had a powerful cultural tool.
Oh, definitely.
Which brings us to the staggering logistics of what is planned for the upcoming 54th edition, scheduled for February 27th and 28th, 2026, because they're basically taking over the F1 pit building.
The infrastructure required to pull this off is just immense. I mean, we're looking at road closures around Republic Avenue and Raffles Avenue starting as early as February 7th.
Wait, February 7th for an event at the end of the month?
Yes. They're locking down major vehicular arteries weeks in advance just to physically construct the environment. And the audience capacity is set at 20,000 spectators, with tickets distributed through SysTick.
That's a massive crowd to manage.
It is. But they've also integrated these great community welfare initiatives like Chair for a Cause, which ensures vulnerable individuals and their caregivers have dedicated access.
That's a really nice touch, but the numbers on the ground are wild. 3,000 performers. And the coordination required is just next level. The central theme for 2026 is Wish.
And just to give you a sense of the scale, Soka Gakkai Singapore alone has a dedicated cohort of 210 participants handling just the opening item, which is titled Sparking of a Wish.
210 people just for the opener.
Just for the opener. And they've been in rigorous training for 4 months, specifically for this 90-minute live broadcast.
4 months? That's intense. And the physical props have scaled up dramatically too, right?
Oh, massively. Over the past few years, the parade utilized these somewhat modular 3-meter mini floats.
Yeah.
But for 2026, they've commissioned 5 massive 7-meter-long community floats.
7 meters?
Yeah. And these aren't just decorative. They're heavily engineered platforms powered by electric motors. But what's really fascinating here is the production model.
How so?
These floats were co-created by 5,000 residents distributed across Singapore's 5 districts.
Okay, coordinating 5,000 different residents to build 5 cohesive, electrically powered platforms is a massive project management feat in itself.
It's unbelievable.
And then on top of that local foundation, they're layering international elements. Like Indonesia is sending a 40-person delegation to the 2026 event.
Right. They're executing a cultural showcase inspired by Wayang, incorporating those traditional shadow puppet silhouettes into the parade's modern wish theme.
Which sounds visually stunning.
Yeah, it does. They're also bringing a rhythmic cultural dimension by featuring a percussionist playing the tifa, which is a traditional instrument from eastern Indonesia.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and by weaving the Indonesian tifa drums into a Singaporean framework, they aren't just inviting neighbors over. They're actively positioning Singapore as a sort of cultural nexus for the broader ASEAN region.
Okay, wait, hold on. I need to push back on this for a second.
Sure.
Electric motors. 360-degree arenas at an F1 track. Road closures weeks in advance. I mean, 54 years ago, this started as a replacement for lighting off firecrackers in your local neighborhood.
Right.
Today, it sounds more like a state-mandated Olympic opening ceremony. Hasn't it completely lost its soul? Like, hasn't it lost that spontaneous grassroots street party feeling that made it a folk festival in the first place?
That is such a good question. And honestly, that exact tension is the crux of Professor I Lo-fen's analysis in her Lian Hizalbo column.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You're pointing out a massive structural shift in how this culture is consumed, and she provides an incredible academic framework to understand it. She looks at live events through the lens of text and image studies on performance.
Okay, text and image studies. So what does this all actually mean? How do you apply that to a loud, moving parade?
So basically, she treats a fleeting, live, physical event as if it were a permanent piece of literature or a painted canvas. She literally reads the spatial design, the movement of bodies, and the audience positioning to decode the underlying structural meaning.
That's a really unique way to look at a festival.
It is. In her column, she describes taking a taxi to the 2026 event shortly after delivering a university admissions talk about how artificial intelligence is reshaping career paths.
Oh, so she's already in that headspace.
Exactly. She arrives already contemplating the rapid acceleration of modern society. She's primed to notice how things are mutating.
Right, her radar is up.
Yes. So as she enters the crowd, waving a glow stick to welcome President Tharman and Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, she notes experiencing a distinct aesthetic fatigue.
Aesthetic fatigue from the parade.
Yeah, from the overwhelming assault of dazzling lights and surging sound systems. It's just sensory overload. And this prompts her to close her eyes and mentally transport herself back to the 2007 Chingay parade, which was held on Orchard Road.
Ah, back when it was an actual street parade.
Right. And through her academic lens, she divides the evolution of the parade into 2 distinct structural eras. The era of gazing and the era of focusing.
Gazing versus focusing. I love this framework. Let's break down the era of gazing first. How does a street parade on Orchard Road fundamentally alter the way a human being consumes culture?
So gazing, or zhangwang in Chinese, refers to the traditional linear street parade. She points out that the experience used to begin with auditory anticipation, not sight.
Oh, like hearing it before you see it?
Exactly. Standing on the pavement, you would hear the distant reverberation of drums or cymbals long before you saw anything. You'd physically stretch your neck, gazing down the long urban corridor, just waiting.
Just looking for the source of the noise.
Right. And then the dragon dances and stilt walkers would slowly, spontaneously reveal themselves, perform briefly in front of your section, and then move on down the route.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Professor I Lo-fen uses a brilliant visual metaphor here. She compares the old street parades to a traditional Chinese hand scroll, a chenghuan.
Yes. It is the perfect analogy for the era of gazing.
It makes total sense mechanically.
Yeah.
Because you don't look at a massive hand scroll all at once.
No, you physically unroll it from right to left.
Right. The imagery reveals itself sequentially, section by section, and if you map that onto a street parade because the route is miles long, every single viewer standing on that street is seeing something slightly different at any given microsecond. Like, the person at the start of Orchard Road is watching a lion dance, while the person at the end of the road is still just hearing distant drums and waiting.
The experience is incredibly fluid, it's decentralized, and it's relaxed. People are looking left and right, chatting with neighbors. It embodies the casual, spontaneous atmosphere of a true folk festival.
The narrative is loose.
Very loose. But then she violently contrasts that hand-scroll experience with the 2026 setup at the F1 pit building, which she defines as the era of focusing, or Jujio.
Because they've completely abandoned the linear street.
Entirely. The 2026 spatial design features a circular, multi-tier stage surrounded by a ring-shaped arena. The performers no longer travel down a miles-long corridor. Instead, they enter from the periphery and immediately converge into the center.
So if the street parade was an unrolling hand scroll, this ring-shaped arena is, well, it's a picture frame. A huaquan.
It's a picture frame. It has fixed boundaries.
Everything is contained.
Exactly. The bodies, the lighting, the choreography, the music, everything is meticulously arranged within this single fixed spatial container. And consider the psychology of those 20,000 spectators for a second.
Okay.
They're seated in a 360-degree arrangement, positioned at various elevations, viewing from different angles.
Yeah.
Yet their attention is entirely synchronized.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They're all focused on the exact same program at the exact same moment in time.
That shift from gazing down a fragmented street to focusing on a synchronized center stage, I mean, it completely rewires the dynamic between the citizen and the event.
It really does.
But why does that matter on a macro level? What is the institutional so what behind moving from a hand scroll to a picture frame?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, moving from the street to a centralized stage is not merely a logistical decision about sightline or crowd control.
Right. It's not just about selling tickets.
Exactly. It represents a fundamental transition in the event's core purpose.
Yeah.
It morphs from a casual folk festival into a grand cultural narrative.
A grand cultural narrative.
Yeah, because a street festival can afford to be chaotic, fragmented, and open to interpretation. But a central stage demands rigorous order. It enforces a tight rhythm and collective focus, designed specifically to project a unified national vision.
Meaning the state is utilizing the architecture of the arena to tell a very specific, curated story to the entire population simultaneously.
Precisely. Look at the theatrical structure for 2026. The protagonist of the show is a character named Little Star, who travels through 4 distinct acts representing Chinese New Year, Hari Raya, Deepavali, and Christmas.
Hitting all the major cultural touchstones.
Right. This is a highly calculated, curated message of multicultural harmony broadcast simultaneously to everyone in the frame. And by integrating delegations from ASEAN countries and Japan, the organizers are actively extending that unified narrative outward.
Signaling Singapore's cosmopolitan identity to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
The physical architecture of the event literally forged its new cultural purpose. But, this brings me back to my earlier pushback.
Oh, about losing its soul.
Yeah. If the main parade has evolved into this highly orchestrated, picture-frame national narrative, where does the regional authenticity live on? It can't just be completely paved over by 7-meter electric floats and F1 infrastructure, right?
Well, the good news is it hasn't been paved over. That specific question of authenticity versus evolution is actually at the very heart of a major diplomatic initiative right now.
Oh, really?
Yes. In November 2025, Singapore and Malaysia announced a joint nomination of the Chingay Parade for UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity.
Which is a massive flex on the global heritage stage. I mean, this is Singapore's 3rd submission following hawker culture and the kabaya.
It is a big deal. And what's fascinating here is examining the contrast between the regional iterations of this festival. Singapore's modern Chingay is teaming up with Malaysia's historical versions.
Ones in Malaysia being Penang's Big Flag Drum Procession and Johor Bahru's Chingay at the Johor Ancient Temple, right?
Exactly.
I have to imagine those Malaysian iterations look vastly different today, given how far Singapore has pushed the technological and multicultural envelope.
The divergence is actually striking. I mean, they share the identical ancestral thread those 19th century Taoist traditions carried over from southern China.
Right, the Tiangong celebrations.
Yes. But Malaysia's celebrations remain deeply anchored in traditional Chinese community practices. If you go to Penang, the focus is heavily on immense physical feats.
Like what kind of feats?
Like balancing gigantic flags on foreheads or jaws, alongside massive traditional lion and dragon dances. It is deeply rooted in the original folk aesthetic.
Whereas Singapore, conversely, branched off entirely.
Right. Singapore utilized the parade as a tool for nation building.
They made it fiercely multicultural, baking in those 4 distinct ethnic acts we talked about, and heavily technological, like swapping out manual flag balancing for drone swarms, LED installations, and electric motors.
Exactly. Malaysia maintained a tighter grip on the original folk tradition, while Singapore adapted the mechanism to construct a modern, multi-ethnic national identity.
And it's cool that UNESCO recognizes both.
That's the beauty of it. UNESCO's framework is broad enough to value both approaches. The organization recognizes the vital importance of preserving the historical root, but it also deeply values the continuous reinvention required to keep a tradition breathing and relevant within a rapidly modernizing society.
And to give credit to the organizers in Singapore, they are actively attempting to bridge that gap between the grand national narrative at the F1 pit and the daily lives of citizens.
Yes, through the Chingay in the Heartlands initiative.
Right. The festival does not simply end when the lights go down at the central stage.
No, it doesn't.
From March 7th to the 29th, those giant 7-meter electric floats don't just get parked in a warehouse somewhere. They are physically deployed directly into the neighborhoods.
They're traveling to the East Coast, Jurong East, Sembawang, and Punggol.
It genuinely feels like a deliberate attempt to recapture a fraction of that original hand-scroll street magic we were talking about earlier.
It is. They've engineered highly specific, localized events tailored for each district to force community interaction.
Yeah, I was looking at the logistics for these neighborhood activations. In the East Coast, they are erecting a massive community wishing tree where residents can physically hang over 500 New Year wishes.
That's beautiful.
And in Sembawang, they're installing claw machines where residents play to generate contributions for local charity work. They even have 50 kindergartners acting as cultural ambassadors, presenting miniature floats they constructed themselves.
Oh, wow. That is hyper-local generational continuity right there.
That really is.
It creates a localized tactile echo of the grand national narrative. It essentially brings the picture frame back out into the street.
But the absolute best detail, and this is a brilliant full-circle historical moment, is the final stop.
Oh, in Punggol.
Yes. On March 29th, the grand finale of the Heartlands Tour takes place in Punggol. And the centerpiece of that finale is the symbolic lighting of actual physical firecrackers.
Bringing the narrative entirely back to the sensory swap of 1973.
Exactly. The sole reason the Chingay parade was formalized in Singapore was to compensate for the banning of firecrackers. And now, over 50 years later, the institution has grown so massive, so technologically advanced, and so incredibly secure in its national identity that it can safely reintroduce the exact explosive trigger that started it all, right back into the community streets.
It is a remarkable geopolitical and cultural arc. I mean, if you look at the mechanics of this evolution, Chingay offers a masterclass in adaptation.
Totally.
Whether you're attempting to build a resilient corporate culture, engineer community movement, or simply understand the shifting dynamics of your own family traditions, heritage is never about freezing something in the past.
It's not about putting an artifact under museum glass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True heritage is about continuous reinvention. It is the active process of taking a tradition, whether it's a street procession, a linguistic quirk, or a holiday meal, and aggressively adapting it so it survives the pressures of modernization and continues to serve the psychological needs of the current community.
That is a phenomenal takeaway. You can't just preserve the past, you have to put it to work for the present.
Exactly.
But, looking at Professor I Lo-fen's analysis of how the spatial design dictates the cultural meaning, it leaves me with a completely different lingering question.
Oh, what's that?
Well, as we move deeper into an era of augmented reality, spatial computing, and digital twins, you have to wonder what the next structural evolution looks like.
Oh, that's a fascinating point.
Right. Will the next iteration of Chingay even require a physical street or an F1 stage at all? Or will the grand cultural picture frame eventually bypass physical architecture entirely, broadcasting a perfectly unified, hyper-personalized national narrative directly into a headset in your living room? Does a tradition still exist if there is no physical ground to march on?
That is the technological frontier every evolving culture is going to have to navigate soon enough.
So the next time you find yourself participating in a tradition, ask yourself, are you looking at a static relic, or are you actively participating in a continuous mutation? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.